Yes, we are back and ready to roll. This is episode 56, Shutdown Inning podcast. Stephen Rissotto along with Tylor Hall, and we have a guest, and this is a very special guest. Yeshayah Goldfarb. He's worked in baseball operations for over 2 decades. He's been a baseball ops assistant. He started as an intern. He's done minor league operations. He's done, vice president baseball operations, baseball resources, player development, you name it. He's done it. And Yeshayah is nice enough to take some time and join the show. What's going on? Welcome.
Thanks, Stephen and Tyler. I really appreciate it. Look forward to our conversation today and talking to everyone out there.
Absolutely. And first and foremost, like this is such a fun time of year. The off season's kind of wrapping up. Pitchers and catchers are set to report in just a matter of days to spring training. For you, like as a baseball executive, what does this time usually entail for you? Are you getting ready for spring training? Are you getting ready for, getting ready to analyze guys? What's going on with what a baseball executive is doing this time of year?
Yeah, great question. It really matters the role you're in, and I've had a lot of different hats with the Giants. I was, basically our Moneyball analysts for many years and helped build that department and ran player development, and then focused on major league team and have scouted throughout my career as well. So, if you're an amateur scout, like it's the college baseball season that's starting and the high school season, and you're starting to look at your follows and get early looks. If you're focused on the major league team or minor league team, like right now, when I was running the minor leagues, I would try to time out the entire schedule to the minute because once you get started in that sprint, which is really like 30 days in the minor leagues, you might have one off day, but you need to time it from, the minute the players and coaches show up in the morning to when they leave at night every single day, because you're really trying to get the most out of those players. There's a lot of development that happens in the minor leagues during that time. And then you're coordinating with, the trainers, the strength coaches, the nutritionalists, the analysts, and you want them to be able to sing and get the most of the players too, which means you've got to put them in positions to be successful with the players, but you can't overdo it with the players because they're ramping up too. So it's a big jigsaw puzzle there. And on the major league side, um, it's a little more relaxed in terms of like there's players that pretty much know they're on the team and they're getting ready, and then there's a group of players that are really trying to make that last roster spot. So you're planning out a fine line between getting the regular players ready and then the off roster players like enough at bats so you can evaluate them before you send them back to the minors where they make the team. And so you're planning out that. And nowadays, a lot of that ramp up actually happens before spring training starts. So no longer a player showing up and getting ready there. A lot of our players are already throwing mid 90s if they're pitchers. Position players have been in Arizona since the beginning of January, many of them, hitting off either live ABs or close to it through technology. And so spring training is more go time now than just kind of relaxing and getting into the season.
Yeah, best shape of your life, Tyler.
Yeah, everybody's in the best shape of their life right now.
Yeah.
Um, really quick, you announced recently you'd be leaving the Giants front office after 24 years with the organization. So first, congrats on, an amazing run. Just can you take us through your decision to step away a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So super grateful for the time I had there. Amazing memories. I grew up in the organization. I right out of college, I was an intern with them and really learned the business from the ground up. In my internship, I like entered scatter reports all day because I'm going to age myself, but it was before, um, hotels had Wi-Fi that scouts could enter reports on and get them to me. So they would mail them to me and something called a fax, which some people may not know, would fax them to me. So I had like this big stack of papers on my desk, which were scouting reports, and I would just enter them all day. And then before the games, I would go down for home games and help our video person in the clubhouse get ready for the game. And then I did like a video replay station off the dugout. So I would see the game from the players' eyes. Gene Klein's longtime coach would sit with me. He was our hitting coach when the players went on the field. So I learned the game from him. And then the players in the dugout, I could ask targeted questions. It was a great introduction to the game. And then I've always been into analytics. So I would do little studies and put them on, Brian Sabean's desks, send them to Dick Tidrow, Ned Coletti then, Bobby Evans, just the group in the office. And that was my introduction. And it was really the same group for a long time, and grew up with them and developed with them. And there's many players that were in our system that are now coaches and staff. And so it's really my family, and I consider them that way. And so, leaving the organization was a tough decision. And it just felt like it was time. I've got a really good relationship with Posey and Zach, our GM. And with the transition, my role was moving to an evaluation role, which I love. I've written a ton of scouting reports over the years, including last year as an advisor for different areas. But I also felt like it was time to get a new experience, whether it's with another organization. We're our own think tanks, and I could learn a lot by putting my head into another organization and just grow myself, or even if it's outside of baseball, just kind of grow and get a new experience. So I would say it's not never that I would ever return to the Giants, but right now it seemed like kind of the best moment in time. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And just kind of go back for a second to your response to actually the previous question. I mean, Stephen asked, coming into spring training, what's it like? And you started talking about like nutritionalists and strength coaches, and you've been with, in pro baseball for a couple decades now. So I remember when I was, you and I are about the same age. Steven's about half our age. But, like when I was a kid, I just felt like, it was like a GM and he made the decisions. Like, how much has the front office evolved where now you have nutritionalists and strength coaches? Has that always been a thing? And now it's just with social media, we know about it? Or is that just a new kind of revolution?
It hasn't always been a thing. I mean, when I started, and I'll give you an example, and you shared your age too. Like in 2001, my first year, the average fastball for a lefty was 89 miles an hour, and for a righty was 90 miles an hour. Today, for a lefty, it's 93 miles an hour, and for a righty, it's 94 miles an hour. And there's probably not steroids being used either. So athletes are just getting better at getting bigger and stronger, and we've kind of built a science around it. And so, for example, when Bill Newcomb came, ended up overseeing kind of the Giants, I think it was 2008 or 2009, one of the first things he wanted to do, and Brian was 100% on board with it, is just build weight rooms at every one of our affiliates. So I helped spearhead that project, which sounds silly now, but we just didn't have that. And so a lot of players would gain strength in the off season, and then like literally from the first day in spring training, they would start to lose weight because it's an everyday game. So like even just creating science and like a rhythm to keep your strength on all year was tough for a long time, and we've just gotten really good at it as an industry. And I can see it, for example, in our Latin players that come over. So we sign, a lot of our Latin American players at the age of 16 and 17. And when I started, when they came over to the United States, it often took them 2 or 3 years to get out of Arizona or a rookie league because they just weren't strong enough to go to a full season and play every day. And now a lot of our Latin players, because they're at our complex and we've got all these state-of-the-art facilities in the Dominican Republic, they're coming over at the age of 19, and they are much stronger than a lot of the college kids that are coming in, because we have facilities that do it. So it's a matter of like putting resources in that space and realizing that baseball has always been a strength game, but now we're getting really good at developing it.
Yeah, that's really awesome, and the progress shows too. I think absolutely. And Tyler and I were just having a conversation this morning about a lot of the international, signing the signing period for international players, and how it's very confusing and teams are like trading money around and nobody knows what's going on. Anyhow, and by the way, before we started recording, we were throwing off, random Giants names, and I just thought of one, Eric Surkamp. So I figured I'd throw that out there before we continue
Nice.
Uh, another, by the way, real estate agent now in the Cincinnati area. So just keep that in mind. I want to ask about Buster because Buster, you have a kind of a unique relationship with him, being that you saw him get drafted, you saw him become a Hall of Fame level player, a championship player, and ultimately now an executive in baseball operations. And being someone who's been around him, what should Giants fans expect from kind of a Buster-led baseball ops group? And it's kind of interesting to see a lot of the former players around the league get into a role like this. I know Chris Getz in Chicago, and there's in Boston with Craig Breslow. So it's definitely kind of become a little bit of a trend, but. What should fans expect from, I guess, Buster in terms of him being the guy in charge now?
It's um, he's got a deep understanding of the game in a way that um, almost no one else has. He's played it at a high level. Um, from the moment he hit the big leagues, he was like already in a lot of ways like older than his age, right? He just knew the game and he could slow it down in a way. And then he has like this competitive fire that exists underneath that all, even though he's very like stoic and, even keel, like that exists. And so like at a baseline, um, he's going to have success, I believe, in the position. And he's a good listener. He wants to know information and he's got a good feel for it. So I think there'll be success. And, I obviously have a strong feeling towards a lot of people that have been in the front office a long time. So he's joining a group that are good communicators, know baseball, have different perspectives. And I mean, I give credit to Farhan too in terms of the situation he's coming into. And I know he was let go and Posey came in, but Farhan did a lot of things behind the scenes that really took our organization forward in terms of the information that we can now produce, in terms of the staff that he added to the group that was already really good, and even in terms of the roster. Like when he took over in 2018, we had, an aging core that was left over from the World Series years. Great players, no doubt about it. But they were, in their early 30s, and there's going to be a downturn. And we we won the most games we ever have in 2021. And Posey and Crawford had career years. Like after some down years, like when players will often go downhill a little bit. And then, Webby and Duvall came onto the scene, and really made an impact. And there's like obviously a lot of other players, and Farhan did a nice job like adding depth to that group. And so I think the roster now that Posey's taking over, there's like this young core that's bubbling up, and you can kind of see it from last year. You can see it this year. A lot of our top prospects are like close to the big leagues. And I really think successful teams have that young core. I mean, Giants fans obviously know the World Series team. That was a young homegrown core. And so I think there's some elements of that in terms of the roster that's coming. It's going to be probably a very good defensive team, with a strength in pitching, which is really fits the ballpark well. And it was a nice, like, I'm a big fan of Adamas, and I think he adds like kind of one of those missing pieces. So I'm pretty excited about the potential of the team. And we'll see, obviously. But it'll take time. There's a lot of things for him to learn, but he knows that, and I think that's kind of unique about him. And I expect him to be successful with it.
Yeah, there's it's a tough division, but there's a lot to look forward to based off of last year too. You have Jung Hoo Lee coming back, and I think a lot of the young prospects who have graduated to become kind of the young players like a Matos and a Luciano, and should be a more interesting team to watch this year for sure. I want to ask about you personally though. how did your journey in baseball start? I actually, it's funny. I read on your LinkedIn bio that you were an Eckersley style 12th pitcher on the staff in college, and I thought that was an amazing description. But how did your journey in baseball start, and was the goal to kind of always be in a front office role or in baseball at some capacity?
Well, I grew up in the Bay Area. I went to Berkeley High. My dad grew up a Brooklyn Dodger fan of all teams. And we used to always play strikeout on the weekends. It's a kind of a Bay Area game. Dontrell Willis, of all people, talks about how he developed his unique motion by playing strikeout because you can't really spin the ball very well when you're young, so you need to come up with these funny deliveries. And so I had that. I grew up watching Eckersley. I was an A's fan growing up, and so I just started throwing submarine at a young age. And I pitched and played a position in high school, and that's how I would get people out is that submarine pitch. And so it allowed me to play in college. I was 78 to 82 from down there. I was often the 11th and 12th guy in that bullpen at UC San Diego. But I was able to learn a lot about the game. I became a leader on the team, even in that kind of position. And then in my senior year, I was just like, I want to stay in this game. I love it. I want to find a way. And um, did a few informational interviews in the Bay Area, sent my resume out to other teams, and really focused here. And I was lucky enough to get an internship in '01. They were looking when I reached out, and I think like that process is much harder today. It was before Moneyball was published. And once Moneyball was published, I noticed it inside the game. We just started getting more and more resumes. People realized like, you don't have to be a longtime big leaguer to work in a front office. And so that was kind of my journey here. And then really at each stage in my career, like I look back at my years as an intern and early in my career as much as I did as a VP. Like I just love the game. You're always going to have something to focus on. For those people out there that like want to work in baseball one day or have the dreams of it, um, the nice thing is now because the staffs are so much bigger than they were, like if there's other passions you have, whether we talked about nutrition earlier or biomechanics, like there's probably a position in baseball that represents that, and even like on like the marketing or business side. And a unique thing about the game is like we talked about spring training, you asked what they're doing. I love that the calendar turns in baseball, so you're really always doing something different. So there's going to be a draft coming up. There's going to be a trade deadline. You're going to prepare for the offseason, whether it's minor league free agents or major league free agents. And then you get to do it again the next year. So you can improve on what you've done. I used to, at the end of spring training, I'd jot down a bunch of things that I think we could do better the next year. I'd put it on the shelf, and then I'd pick it up in December when I start planning it, and I would have a list because I knew we would do it again. And so it's like it keeps it new and fresh. And I think the other piece working in the game is just that you have a win and a loss every day. Just like the fans are living it, you're living it as a front office staff member, and like that's a driver. I would imagine myself in competition with the other person doing the same job I had on the other 29 teams, and I want to do it better than them. I want to beat them at it. And if everyone in your organization does that, you're going to be pretty successful. So like that's a driver too that I like love. And I would wake up every morning to like just push me that much farther.
Awesome. So like kind of a quick follow up on that, you
Yeah.
mentioned like analytics is big, for you and you started going through college and near the end of your college career, you realized you wanted to keep working in baseball. So like what did you study in college that helped translate into like your internship and then your career afterwards?
I mean, I studied some stats in college. I was a history major, so it wasn't as specific. I always had a feel for statistics, and I always followed the game through that. And playing really helped me too. That being said, like the skills you need now are probably not the same as when I graduated. The data is a lot bigger. So a lot of people that come in have some statistics background or can code a little bit, just to like make those numbers sing. I could do it all in spreadsheets and build models that way. Um, so that has changed a little bit. I do think like having a feel for the game is super important to blend with the analytics. So like probably a lot of the viewers know, like Brian Sabean and like Dick Tidrow, two of my mentors, they're very scouting heavy. And I know, there's like a dialogue out there of like analytics for scouting, and that really never existed with the Giants. And some of it is like I had strong relationships with our scouts, so maybe that's part of it. But also, I would frame our analytics around scouting in a lot of ways too. So, like for example, if I'm going to build a profile about a player analytically, I would often blend it with a scouting report. So like a scouting report's written like you give them a hit tool, a power tool, a run, throw, field. And analytically, you can also build a profile that way too. Like you can use analytics to show what kind of hitter they're going to be. You're always projecting, and then what kind of power they're going to have, how they're going to run, what their defense looks like analytically, and then you can compare the two. So I think like that was one way that like I utilized my ability to blend with what the scouts were showing. And so you could really, let's say you're looking at Aaron Rowan and you're making a decision if you're going to sign him. Well, maybe our scouts think that he has plus power, but analytically he doesn't. And this is just an example. That's not like the right match for him. But then it forces you to ask a question like, does this player have power, or will they have power if they don't now? And a lot of the times they would match, but sometimes they wouldn't. And sometimes the scout would notice changes in a player that show that they've taken the next step, and sometimes the analytics would. So they really blended off of each other back and forth. And I built extremely close relationship with both of them, and I might have viewed the players in slightly different ways, but I think like they respected what they heard and what they saw. And, when Farhan came in, he had a very different view on it. He came from a very analytical background. And so I actually shifted some of my stuff more to the scouting side because I was very comfortable with that, because I realized that that can be an add in my role to provide more of a scouting lens, because I had that kind of in my bag and he already had the analytical side covered.
So we have a couple questions for you that are more kind of like big picture, just to kind of give our listeners who are, baseball fans an idea of how front offices operate. Obviously, that might vary from team to team. No one operates exactly the same, but like, how does a Major League Baseball front office approach an offseason? Is there like, is there kind of like a rolling big board that's always the same, and you just kind of look at it as, well, this guy's a free agent now? And I'm sure obviously there's like needs that a front office would want to target, depending on their roster structure. But just kind of in general, how does a front office approach an off season? Which I know is very broad, general, but
yeah. So, like there's a few layers of it. There is like the stuff that the public would like know and enjoy, which is like the bigger names. And you spend some time on that. And you talk about it internally, and you bring the right people in to like that have either seen them or analyzed them, and you build like very in-depth profiles. You get a history on them also, like people that have played with them. So you're doing your homework on them and ranking them. But the other layer that like we focus a lot of our time on is actually minor league free agents, which they're often like up and down guys, or even players that have been in the minor leagues for 7 years and haven't made it to the big leagues. And they all become free agents at the end of the season. So there's a pool of 300 plus players out there that can give you depth. And so, we know the major league team has a 26-man roster, but you have to look at it as more like a 55-man roster, because there's going to be injuries. There's going to be players aren't going to perform like you thought they will, and that's how deep you end up having to go in your system. So those minor league free agents become like key players on your team, and if you get them right, you actually get like a really cheap contributor. So during our World Series years, I would argue we were the best at baseball at it. Like the WAR of our players that we signed on minor league free agents were as high as anybody. And I give you some examples, like I remember us walking out of the 2009 winter meetings. We won Organization of the Year, which was pretty special. And we're walking out, and one of our top targets was Jose Casilla. And Santiago Casilla, and we're walking out of there, and Bobby Evans is talking to his agent on the phone, and we sign him right there on the spot, and he, becomes a household name with the Giants. Or like Yasmero Petit was like a top prospect and struggled breaking into the big leagues, and I'm following, winter ball stats every day, and he's suddenly pitching again and throwing really well in Venezuela. He's got like 12 strikeouts, 1 walk, and 9 innings. He had just started coming. So at the same time, one of our longtime coaches, Jose Agusil, sees him there and messaged to us that he's looking pretty good, and then we sign him. So those types of signings, Gregor Blanco's in that boat. Jose Uribe was in what's his name? Yeah.
Andres Torres.
Andres Torres was in that boat. So there's like a lot of actually Vogelsong was in that boat where we had traded him in '03 for Schmidt. He had injuries. He played in Japan. He came back. Dick Chidrow actually saw something in his delivery that he wanted to change. We signed him, and then he's pitched in our World Series and is a core member of those World Series teams. So like those players make a big difference, and so we focus a lot of time on there. Even I remember one year, this is going to sound dorky, but like after we won, I can't remember which year, it might have been the 2012 World Series. I remember like we went from the parade literally like to the office to work on minor league free agents, because free agency hits 5 days after the World Series. So working in the game, it's a lifestyle. It's part of it, but you love it, and you're behind a little bit if you're in the playoffs because you're focusing on that and not spending as much time as you should be on like all those free agents that are about to hit the market.
Yeah, man, I think that's really interesting because, a lot of just baseball fans, they think of guys like AAA. They don't like AAA players are still like part of like the 99.9% top baseball players in the world. So if you can find that little thing you tweak that unlocks their potential, I think that's something that the Giants have done really well for a long time. So it's really interesting to hear you speak on that. You did also mention at the beginning of your previous answer, a lot of fans just focus on the big names or like a big need. How much consideration, if any, is given to what fans' reaction might be to a move, whether that's maybe getting rid of a fan favorite or signing a guy that might not be the person that fans might think would be the person to sign?
It's a good question. The business side is often like paying attention to that too. And I know like I would listen to talk radio at times on the way home from the ballpark, so I would hear it too.
My apologies.
No problem. I love the passion that our fans have. Something, and I only know this place because this is where I grew up, but like the connection they make to our players is like real and strong, and like that's meaningful. And I'll give you an example. One of the It was a hard trade. It was the right baseball trade, but in 2016, we traded for Matt Moore at the deadline. And he ended up pitching an amazing game in the playoffs, 8 innings. We ended up losing in the eighth, but it was the right move. And the players that we traded were Lucius Fox, who was like a top prospect then, and then Matt Duffy. And because our fans became so attached to our players, and I love Matt Duffy, like he's one of the favorite players that I've ever had in our system. I think he's unbelievable. And so that was hard too. Like that's the human piece of it. But there was an uproar about it. And like literally after we traded him, it was right at the deadline. I started getting texts from my wife and like, hey, can you call me? And I'm like trying to finish stuff there. And then she started calling me, and I was like, give me 5 minutes. And so I stepped out and I answer the phone, and it's my 8-year-old son crying, and he's just bawling.
Oh.
And I'm like, oh my God. I was like, what's wrong? And then my wife gets on the phone, and he says he's never going to speak to you again. You just traded Matt Duffy. And so like but that was a feeling like there was an attachment there. And obviously he's close to the game because I talk about the players and he was one of my favorite players that I talked about. And like, so that is real. And like, I really appreciate that about the Giants fans. And I like what they feel about Pablo Sandoval when he walks into a place, or Sergio Romo, or like you go back in time, like there's a strong attachment to them. And so um, from like I have to look at it as making the best baseball decision. I think you can make a lot of mistakes because every free agency, every trade deadline, there's going to be a big name out there, and they don't always make the most sense. You can't just do it. Um, but I do think like it is like considered for sure. And then there's the human element of like all of our friends who are Giants fans that are bugging us and pissed off,
Yeah.
and that's just part of it.
I can't believe you traded Skeeter, who was Matt Duffy's
The
huge
cat.
cat.
Yeah. No, that's
Yeah, I
right.
mean, I think that's a great recall. Really, I mean, Steven and I are on X or Twitter, or whatever you want to call it now, and still to this day, I see at least a few tweets a year. Can't believe we traded Matt Duffy.
Yeah, no. Matt Moore was like I remember the prospect list and it was like Mike Trout, Bryce Harper, Matt Moore was right there. I mean, he was a guy and just I mean, he had the tools to break out, had a really good breaking ball. Like I remember being on that train of this is a good deal. And, I just think it's interesting how all that goes down. And Matt Moore, that's another had a base hit up the middle in the division series against the Cubs. That was a big hit in that
Right.
game. So Gorky Hernandez, a sliding catch at the okay, now my head's going into
Uh,
where we're going down a rabbit hole here. Um I want to ask about, negotiations for contracts and I don't know how a part of these you are in or I don't know how much of part of contract negotiations you are a part of, but are you like do you also have the responsibility in a front office, and I don't know what position this is, at putting a dollar figure next to a player? Does that happen where it's like, okay, we're not going to go over this specific number for a player? Was that ever something that you had to worry about from a financial standpoint, or were you just solely based on, you know, scouting, analytics, and kind of player evaluation that way? Did you ever have to like, come up with, because I know, sometimes I don't know how this works, but like a certain amount of war is worth a certain amount of dollars on an open market. I don't know how that's calculated because I don't even know how war
And
is
which
calculated.
war are you using? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
basically.
Fangraphs, or the public, I think, is smarter now
but
because they have access to everything, and I don't know how you feel about that. But um, were you ever like associated with trying to come up with a dollar figure for players?
yeah, absolutely. Most teams have something called an asset value on players, which is kind of what you're talking about. It's like a projection of, let's just call it a projection of war, and then you put a number to that, like a value to it. And so you might project a player to, be worth $15 million in terms of their production, but it's going to cost $20 million to get them. So you need to make a decision about that difference. And so yeah, it factors in, but it's also like sometimes you got to pay a little bit more, like market value, to get that player. And you just have to be willing if it's worth it. Like I used to run some simulations that would project, the total number of wins we'd have at the end of the year based on the roster you have. And it's a very inexact science, but it is helpful to know that like we're projecting it 86 wins, and if we go spend $150 million on this player that might be able to give us 4 wins. Well, the difference between 86 wins and 90 wins is a big deal because that could be the difference between a playoff appearance and not a playoff appearance. And while that's abstract and it might not get you there, there might be times where it's worth pushing in at that time. There's also been like some studies around, the later in the offseason you go, usually the price of players goes down a little bit because money has been spent, which means like often earlier in the off season, and this is a generalization, you might be overpaying for players to get who you want, but later you're underpaying. And like the Giants last year, we did a lot of our heavy lifting late in the off season, and Chapman ended up being a pretty good deal. And like really, Snell was, if he hadn't gotten hurt during that time, he's overachieving in terms of what we paid, even though we paid a lot of money for him. You only had him on really a 1 year with a player option. And so you don't get to choose the players who's left late in the offseason, but that can be a strategy too, in terms of like what you have left. So yeah, it's absolutely taken into account. We've done for years. I bet a lot of front offices do. Like we'll kind of run a contest about like kind of guessing about what the contracts will be for every player. You know, a lot of websites will actually do the same thing and crowdsource, and we'll pay attention to that just to kind of get a sense of what the market will be, but it doesn't always follow that. Um, yeah, and sometimes that player is like you think they're the one that you need, and you end up overplaying for it, and sometimes you're right, and sometimes you're wrong. They're not all going to be cheap.
Yeah. No, and everybody's constantly there's that baseball simulator website.
Yeah.
And it's like it's interesting because the guys that always have big money attached to them just are just like dead weight on those trade simulators, and it's got like I remember running some, and it would be like I could trade Anthony Rendon for like this amount, and it'd be like nothing, but it wasn't realistic because the salaries involved, and it was just interesting. I do want to ask though, kind of shifting to some of the people that you worked with, or I guess worked under, and kind of the three main ones. You mentioned Zaidi already, but also Brian Sabean and Bobby Evans, and Bobby's back in the organization. Um, and Sabean, of course, is back in baseball, or I guess more in a more involved capacity in New York. And um, you snuck in Ned Colletti there too, and I have asked Ned Colletti about him sounding exactly like Brian Sabean,
Yeah.
because they just like if you close your eyes, you don't know who's talking. And Ned Colletti had a great story about Brian Sabean's wife thinking that Brian was Ned when Ned answered the phone. So, anyways, uh, what are some of the differences in philosophies when it comes to who's in charge? Like, how much does that person in charge have on the philosophy and the direction of the organization, or is it even an ownership thing? Do they even have kind of a spell on where the direction of the franchise goes? So, kind of between Sabian, Evans, Zaidi, maybe a little bit of ownership too. How does the person in charge hold the keys to the philosophy?
Great question. We're kind of like a big ship that you're turning in some ways because there's a lot of people there as well. They're definitely like the captain of the ship, and they're making the big decisions. Again, a lot of it's happening under the hood. So like there's player development philosophies. Like we have like big manuals we had at one point that have like evolved to other things over time in terms of like what our philosophy is and what we're going to focus on. Um, you know, Brian Brian wrote a lot of the original stuff that like I came into the organization with, like what was important. When Bill Newcomb came over in 2009, I think he had a major influence on all of us, and he wasn't bringing knowledge, but he forced us to like rethink kind of what we believed in and ask really good questions to force us to like tighten things up is probably the best way to describe it. And then Posey's talked about like the Giants way a few times since he's come in, and actually Bill Newcomb is the one who kind of like since I've been here, he kind of helped write it with Brian and with Larry, like what the Giants way would be. And they spent a lot of time like doing that in 2009. And so a lot of kind of what Posey's talking about and like what he grew up in and what he saw was kind of existed before then, but like they like actually wrote it down in a real way. And so that's kind of like a directional piece, like a North Star for an organization. I think it's really helpful. Um, and Farhan like saw a lot of that and added some stuff to it that was like really impactful. So like there is one piece like how much you're going to invest in staff and like resources, whether it's data or technology, which may not be as interesting to fans, but it actually like helps you make better decisions and develop players. We ownership invested in Papago Park, which is like our minor league facility, which I helped, I helped design on like our side of things in terms of like what it would look like in the spaces to like make it like a world-class baseball training center, and it's unbelievable. That takes ownership, to like put a vision in there and say we're going to invest in this. And I mean, it's so nice that we had Team USA practicing there, and one of our staff members said they saw Mike Trout like walking around Papago with his phone, like showing people like what it looked like. And that's an example. It's also a competitive advantage because you can develop, players want to go to Arizona all off season because it's an unbelievable facility, and work out there. And then we also redid Scottsdale Stadium. So like those things are like ownership. They're like big picture pieces, and baseball ops can like make an argument for why it's necessary. I mean, each one of them has their own personalities. Like Brian, as you can guess, a very good baseball man, also very intense, where he is as competitive as anyone I've ever met. I used to sit next to him for every home game for many years, and sometimes you'd go 6 innings and no one would say a word, and we would just be like focused on it, writing notes about the players and what we're seeing. And other times, he'd be talking the whole time, and it's like kind of having like a 3-hour meeting with your boss talking about the system or baseball. And Bobby, he's one of the best communicators I've ever been around. Unbelievable. I used to have, when I was very young in the organization, I used to have to process like our expense reports and like our phone bills. And I mean, he'd be on the phone like 6,000 minutes a month, like on like a lot. He negotiated a lot of contracts, but he's like really good at communicating with people, players, staff throughout the organization on a regular basis. And I think like that's like a super powerful quality. Um, and Farhan is really good at like finding competitive advantages, and really smart, and hires good people, and like has a good heart around like what he's doing. Um, and added a lot to like what we already had when he came in. So like they all have qualities that kind of push them forward, but they also are good at delegating to people and like letting them be, like you're hiring people for a reason, and let them sing, and like really let them like spread their wings and do what they're hired to do. And all of those individuals like have that quality. And I appreciate that because I got to work with them, and like as someone who worked with them, like that's what you want. You want support. You want to be able to go to them if you have questions, but you also want to feel like they've got your back and they trust you, and you can like do what you need to do to like make the Giants better.
Michael Kickham is another one. Tyler, sorry,
Love
I'm
it.
just thinking of.
You gotta, yeah.
Can I get a
I've got a
Chad
story.
Zerby?
Oh, you got a story on Michael Kickham?
Probably it's like a random. I think he was one of the three. There was I don't remember the year he was drafted. I have to go back and look, but so I was the analytical voice in our draft room for many years. And there was one draft, and I think he was one of the three. It was like the middle rounds, and Dick Tidrow was our scouting director, and it was like round 4, 5, and 6, and he had these three pitchers that he really liked, right? And he's like, I really like these pitchers. And he turned to me and he was like, what order would you put them in? And I was like, well, um, I like them in this order. Like, I don't remember the exact order. I like these three in this order, like in terms of who's going to be better than the other ones. But I actually would pick them in this order if I'm the analytical person in each draft room. And a lot of it's based on like sample size and like the qualities they have. And so um, we put them in order, and we actually ended up getting all three. Like none of them got picked, which was kind of like, I don't know. I felt good about it, but it was also like a fun little game to play to like, he had identified who he likes, but to be able to actually get all three of them in the middle rounds are hard because the board starts disappearing around then. And like, that's like 90 picks between the three. So he was one of those three, I'm pretty sure. And he had great stuff. Like for a lefty, he had 4 pitches when he came out. He had great stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So Mike Kickham was the sixth round pick in 2010 out of
There you go.
Missouri
That was
State.
the year then. Who was the fifth and fourth round? Do you have it up?
Ooh,
Made his major league debut against the A's, and he struck out Chris Young, not general manager Chris Young, who's another guy, former player leading baseball operations. I should add him to the
Yes.
list. But I mean, I could go all day naming just random cup of coffee. Like I remember watching, I think I forget what year it was in San Jose, because I'm actually in Pacifica, also in the Bay Area, and I'd go down to it was called Municipal Stadium. It's called like Excite now or something like that. And the Giants had this left fielder. I don't know whatever happened to him, but he had like a 20 homer year down there, and his name was Devin Harris. And just this guy could hit, and I
Big,
never,
strong kid.
yeah, and
Yep.
I never like heard of him again after that year. And Mac Williamson was on that team. Tyler Rogers was on that team. Um, just I mean, legendary. Brock Bond was on that team. I mean, just
Yeah.
there are some Ricky Oropeza. I mean, I love it. Just love it.
Those
Mind
teams
it,
won a
Tyler.
lot too.
Yeah.
Like we had the best winning percentage in the minor leagues for about 10 years there. It was like 2005 to like 2015. And I was very involved in the minor leagues and we took pride in it. And a lot of it was like our scouts getting some really good players late and then just developing, and we made an emphasis. Like winning was a big deal for us. And like there's a lot of focus in player development about development, but we felt like development and winning went hand in hand. And it was like, it was talked about. We had some really gritty players. The funny thing is, like, you just never know who someone's going to become. Like, it really is. It's what's inside, and there's always going to be a scout if you draft them that think they can play in the big leagues, and it's a long path for them. It's like just a reminder for fans when you see someone, I think a lot of them know it, when you see someone step on the big league field for the first time or just in the big leagues, like that is a long path to get there. That is hard. And it's it's like blood, sweat, and tears for them to get there. And it's really special. And it's special from behind the scenes too. Like when we won the World Series and be able to look at all the players on the roster that are standing out there, know the history of when we signed them or we drafted them, like who developed them, what scouts recommended them. Um, it's like Brian said, it had a quote, it's a village. Like that takes a win, and that's really true. Like just knowing the individuals that like worked with them and touched them like all the way through to get them there that day and their family, like it's amazing. It's like there's nothing like it. And so um I don't know. It's something to appreciate every time you see that accomplished be made. And what I like is I know a lot more now. Like you see it on social media where they're filming sometimes when they let a player know they're going to be in the big leagues for the first time after being in the minor leagues a long time. And so those are some of the best videos. And I've been able to be there in person at times and tell players that. And I mean, it's about making dreams. We're all kids at heart. Most of us played at some point in little league or wherever, whether it's softball or baseball or basketball but when you get to do it at the professional level after all that time, it's a road. It's a lot of people that have to back them to get there too.
Yeah, definitely. Really quick, that's a perfect lead into our next question. But just to answer your question, 2010 draft, fourth round Seth Rosen, fifth round Heath Embry, sixth round Mike Kickham. So I think
Yep,
those are the three you were
those are the
talking
three.
about.
Yeah, those are the three exactly.
Seth,
And
yeah, Seth Rosen went for Hunter Pence with Tommy Joseph and Nate Schierholtz, I think.
exactly. And if you
Yeah.
look it up, I think he's University of Minnesota off the top of my head, and he had a ton of innings that year. And
Yeah.
so that's why he was first, because he had the largest sample size. I figure every other team were going to be on him. And he also projected as a starter potentially because of all the innings he had thrown in college. And the other two were more reliever profiles. So I thought we could get them later.
Nice. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned the World Series and, when they happened, you got to see, remember back on when you drafted them. I mean, one of my favorites is when Bruce Bochy telling like Brandon Belt, you want a beer? Have a beer. I think that was on the franchise. Um, but, three championships in 5 years, mostly homegrown talent, scrappy veteran combo. So what are some of your favorite memories of those teams? Like, outside of, I guess, if you even want to talk on it, like, as you said, remembering when you brought them into the organization, but just when you think of 2010, 2012, 2014, like what stands out?
It's moments in time. We won those on the road, a lot of
Mhm.
those series, and I was lucky enough to get to travel with the team then. So what I remember is like the nervousness, which every fan is going to have too, but the feeling in the stadium when things happened. So like, I mean, probably my most nervous game, that Red series, I think it was 2012. There's the Hunter Pence speech, which was a big one, but there were some amazing moments in that series. There was like Vogelsong threw an unbelievable game in game three, to get us past, to the next round. And like Romo had an unbelievable matchup against Jay Bruce that series, and like that, it just wasn't a good matchup for Romo, and he must have thrown 12 pitches to him and ended up getting him out. Posey hit the grand slam, which was just like when you're in the stadium in that game five, it's just like the entire air sucked out, and you're sitting there, and I can't cheer. Like I'm like, it just didn't feel right. Like I'm there to scout the team, and like, but like, in your heart, you're like exploding with joy. Crawford hit a grand slam with Bumgarner on the mound, I think in 2014 against
With
Pittsburgh,
Pittsburgh, yeah.
I mean, the fans there are unbelievable, and it just went silent. Or like probably, when Bumgarner came in Game Seven against Kansas City, the place went completely quiet, whatever it was, like the fourth inning. I'm not sure exactly what inning. And then he runs it. And then I will never forget the feeling. He had two outs in the ninth inning, and they hit a triple. And I still am not positive it couldn't have been an inside the park home run. It was a tough call at third base. I don't think the runner completely like ran full speed out of the box like he was running,
Yeah.
but
I
then
mean, it should have been a
Crawford,
single out of the box, so I get
it
why he
should have
wasn't
been.
running too hard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm like sitting behind the plate and I can't really see it. I can just see that I'm fumbling for the ball, and so like my heart's pounding out of there. The fans are going crazy, and you're just like, get it in. But I do know that like Crawford's the cutoff man there, and Crawford, like, of anyone during his time playing shortstop, like has one of the most accurate throwing arms and best arms. And so I do believe he would have probably thrown a strike in that situation. I just don't like, he's probably out, but I don't know. And so that's like, I will never forget, just it's like those feelings. It's those feelings you get that like you can't duplicate. I mean, everyone got to see Ishikawa's home run to beat the Cardinals. That was unbelievable. So that's why you're a fan. That's why I work in this game. Like those are the moments. It is on the flip side too. Like I've got some memorable ones that like are really, really painful.
That you wish you could forget.
Yeah, but that's part of it too. Like, Game Six of the 2002 World Series, like you know, that was one of the toughest days, but it also drives you too.
Yeah. I mean, that was really cool just to hear you talk about. I remember, I'm sure Steven does too. I remember where I was for every one of those games that you just mentioned. And that throw into Crawford in Game 7 in Kansas City, he had to field a short hop too. The throw in from Perez, he had to scoop
Yeah,
it too, so he doesn't field that clean. Gordon might have scooted home, so it all worked out
exactly.
in the long run. Um, and just kind of reflect on those teams. I mean, you can think of all the names: Bumgarner, Kane, Lincecum, Posey, Belt, Crawford, Wilson, Romo, kind of all homegrown, developed through the system. So when you take a look around baseball, a lot of teams, they are all of them are obviously trying to build from within to develop that talent and then kind of supplement. But I mean, obviously it varies, but like what's the key to growing a good farm system? And I think that's kind of been the transition for the Giants right now is, they went from building their championship teams from a solid farm, and now depending on what you want to think about all the different farm system rankings, they're not quite there. But just in general, like building a farm system, what that's a very a lot to
No,
unpack there. But
it's a good question because, an organization like the Giants, we don't, quote unquote, rebuild in the normal sense. Like there's an expectation to compete every year. There's a few other organizations like that, like Boston's like that way, the
yeah,
Yankees, the Dodgers,
yeah,
St. Louis, maybe.
Cubs
So that
usually.
that
Yeah.
um, so I actually think some of this is in retrospect, but it's just like it's part of it. Like the end of the Bonds years was a period where we lost a number of years in a row, and we were trying to build teams like that can compete in his last years. So we we hit on a bunch of our top picks, like maybe the best run in the history of baseball. Like it was Lincecum and Bumgarner and Posey and Zach Wheeler, like all in a row in terms of our
Hmm.
first round picks. So hitting on those picks, there's a big deal. You can get really good players later in the draft, and we got to pick a little bit earlier because we didn't have great teams, but also like we didn't have a system that could fill in around Bonds. We had to either trade young players, which is hard because we felt like we had to win then in the big leagues. And I would say that that happened again a little bit. And I kind of mentioned it like when Farhan took over, like leading into him too, is like we just had this aging core and there was an expectation to win. We won those World Series. It's the same group. 2016, we had a very good team. We didn't get there. And so, we went out and we got a bunch of free agents. So it's like Samardzija and Cueto. We spent money to like build around that core and we didn't quite get there. And then that group aged and, we got Longoria then, who was kind of like, so it was like trying to win, but you have to win. We traded for, you know, an example is like you can't win every trade. We traded, Brian Reynolds, for McCutchen, and McCutchen was a very good player, and we needed like there was a feeling we needed to win. So like sometimes there's like you're not going to get them all right, and when you have an expectation to win every year, it's really hard to like trade the right players all the time and then also win, but then develop. So sometimes it's just at the basic level, it's like drafting well and signing international players well and developing them well, but also at times maybe not trading them away. Sometimes you lose draft picks. Like there's a choice. Like when we got Adamas, like we're losing a draft pick there. Last year when we got Snell, we're losing a draft pick there and Chapman. And so like we picked in the first round and fourth round last year. This year we're going to miss a pick. But then on the flip side, Arizona, like over the last 2 years, Arizona's got like 8 or 9 picks. San Diego has 8 or 9 picks. We're more like four. That makes a difference in the long run. Like that's a little bit behind the scenes. Those are decisions that are going to be made, that were made. And it doesn't mean that those draft picks are going to become difference making big leaguers by any stretch of the imagination, but it does mean you might be late, adding a little less talent, or it's just going to be harder to find that talent because you don't have those early picks. That's just a reality. That's a decision that was made, and it could have very well been the right one because the goal is to win the World Series, not to win the draft. But that does sometimes add up in terms of like talent you're bringing into the organization and homegrown them. Other organizations are willing to like rip it down, the Rays traded a bunch of players at the trade deadline, and they have a bunch of new players. They have a good system, but they are able to like replenish it through major league trades because they don't have that expectation to necessarily win the World Series every year. And I love that pressure, and you can do both. It's just you have a little bit less margin for error.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're gonna wrap up in just a few. We kept you for way too long, so we do
No
really
problem.
appreciate the time.
Yeah.
And kind of going back to those championship years, Tyler and I are both huge Tim Lincecum fans, and he's always been kind of an enigma and done his own thing. And we do hope that he's well, right now, of course, but he kind of represents that era after Bonds, coming back, and he was something to look forward to. The Freak. He was on all the Sports Center commercials. There's the SI magazine. There's just so much aura about him, and I think people really connected to him because he was the 5'7", 5'8" guy that you could see, skateboarding up the Embarcadero after games. So he kind of represented the city well in that way. And do you have any favorite Timmy moments of, what he did in the organization? I mean, we talk about like very strong peaks because Tyler and I are just off Hall of Fame talk on this podcast, and we're talking about King Felix and all these guys with kind of shorter peaks and what the future of starting pitchers on the Hall of Fame ballot are going to be. And he was one of the definitions of great peaks for that 4 or 5 year stretch. So, do
Unbelievable.
you have any Lincecum memories that kind of stand out from your time and his time in the organization?
My first memory of him is like what our scouting staff thought about him. Like analytically in college, off the charts. He won the Golden Spikes Award that year. I think he had 199 strikeouts without that many innings. He'd throw like a Friday night and then he'd close the game on Sundays sometimes, like things you don't do. But Darren Whitkey was our North West scout. I'm sure other people deserve credit. He was on him. Dick Tidrow, our scouting director, was on him and actually was told not to go see him in person so that other teams would not be on him in the same way. Um, and they did their homework. Like he could throw long toss line to line. He would throw every day. He could walk around the bases on his hands. He had this unique delivery, and he shouldn't have fallen to 10 where we took him. But he did because people weren't sure if he could be a starter or a reliever. They hadn't seen anybody like him before. And so I do remember like the conviction of our staff that this is who we want was as strong as any player I can remember. And so we did get him there. And I was the one who like walked him around after at the press conference when we signed him. He came. So I do remember that. Like that's when I first met him. And, he's in jeans and flip flops. And I think like he might have had his toes colored or something. And like the first thing I noticed about him is he just really knew who he was and was comfortable in his own skin, which like this is more the scout hat on me, but that's something I look for is just like he knows he knows he belongs there. He's maybe nervous about the situation, but he knows who he is. And then obviously he wasn't in the minor leagues very long. Unbelievable story. Um, the stuff that was coming out of him, people just hadn't seen before. He was throwing 4 pitches that were just electric. And so, but that's kind of like my early memory of him, kind of my first thoughts about him. I've got a I've got a Bumgarner story too, if you want one.
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
absolutely.
He's
No,
always a good
we're
one.
not a Bumgarner podcast. No bum stories, please. No, yeah, let's hear it, please.
This is gonna be a weird one because I kind of gave away the punchline that it's Bumgarner, but so I'm running our farm system. I think it's 2009, and I'm always following all the games on my phone or my computer that are happening, and I'm following the Richmond game. Um, he's one of our top prospects then, and he's throwing a shutout through like 7 innings and gets taken out. I think we win 2-0, and I get a call from our manager after the game, and it's not that uncommon. Like a player will get hurt, you need to move someone there. They're letting me know, and he calls and he's like, "Hey, like we got a problem. One of our players just like broke this thing in the clubhouse. He was like really upset." And I was like, "Okay, like who was it?" And he was like, "It was Bumgarner." And I was like, "What are you talking about? He just threw a shutout." And he was like, "Yeah, but he went 0 for 3 with 2 strikeouts." So
Oh,
19-year-old Bumgarner was as competitive as you know. And he always was from the moment he joined the organization. And so like even on the hitting side, like it just was important to him. He obviously learned how to channel it over time, but like, yeah, that's real. Like what you
Yeah.
see is real.
Yeah,
uh,
the best was when he Bruce Bochy opted to DH him in Oakland, and he was the first pitcher to ever be a DH in a game because the bench was like Grant Green and Ramiro Pena, and he just happened to be the best option, and he hit a double on his first at bat. That's amazing. And by the way, quick note on Lincecum in that draft, Pacifica's own Greg Reynolds was the top pick in that draft too, out of Stanford. So
Yeah.
want to give props to another random name,
yeah.
Good
Greg
call.
Reynolds,
I
who
mean,
also he pitched against Surkamp in that game where the Reds were in San Francisco and they were the home team. So
Your
the double
memory is unbelievable.
the double header, yeah. Jeff Francoeur was playing in that game too. Yeah.
Yeah, there were I think like four college pitchers in that draft. Right-handed college pitchers picked before Lincecum at 10, I believe, something like
Yeah,
that, three or
so I was
four.
gonna ask, you thought, like there's no way Lincecum should fall to 10. Where did the front office at the time feel like he should go? Like
So you
third,
always
fourth, or
in a draft, you line up your draft board how you like them.
hmm
I can't remember if he was number one, but he was like in the top three or four probably. You try to project out who's going to take in before you, but the draft is funny that way. Like Bumgarner, we were just talking about them. We got him at 10, but he wasn't necessarily the top person on our board, and so you line them up the best you can. But there is, I wouldn't say it's luck, but there is like some game theory that gets them there. Like if a player that we might have had above Bumgarner was not taken by a team, we might have ended up with that player.
hmm
So we don't think about it that way, but that's real. And so, Posey we had number one on our board. Like John Barr, that was his first year, and when he got here in January, he told me like this is who I want, and Posey wasn't even that high on like Baseball America's list at that point. So like that's unique, and we were drafting high enough, and luckily he fell to us at 5. But even in that scenario, like I sat for 3 hours with Brian the day before the draft, just helping him process like who he would take if Posey didn't get there. And so you're ranking all those other players around them because you don't know for sure. So you do the best you can, but there's a lot of misses for us. There's a lot of misses for other teams, and sometimes like you had three or four players there that you're trying to rank, and you either don't rank them wrong, or the player you really like didn't get there, or sometimes all four of those players are actually not big leaguers. And that's just like the part of the draft, and you weren't creative enough or like realize that someone you have later is actually the person. So it is hard. But there's also that little bit of like, again, I don't think it's luck, but it's like it's something that gets that player to you that become household names, and they end up with you rather than someone else. The biggest one is like Trout falling to 25. Like that's a lot of teams that could have taken him, but even like Anaheim, I think took Reichik before Trout, the pick before, if I'm remembering the name right. So that's just it's what makes it fun and exciting, but it's also like it's hard.
yeah. I mean, and kind of following that trend a little bit, and you obviously have a passion for baseball. You're a fan of the game, and so, and growing up as a baseball fan, kind of the memories growing up or your memories as a baseball fan. So, what's it like to see like players you had a hand in bringing to a team, or even if you didn't have a hand in them, just seeing decisions that you had a hand in helping develop like these amazing like lifelong sports memories for baseball fans.
Yeah.
You kind of touched on it a little bit earlier,
Yeah,
but
but
like
yeah, I mean, Posey talked about in his press conference being in the memory business, like memory making business, which I think is very true for like the fans and like why we do this. But I like a lot of it, I think of it as like the reaching potential business on like my side of it. Like, frankly, if we hire a new staff member, like I want them to be successful because they will make us successful. So I like throughout my career, I've often tried I don't get everybody, but like within their first 30 days, I try to reach out to them if I wasn't part of the hiring process and like introduce myself, get to know who they are, what their passions are, just because I know our paths are going to cross, and I might have opportunities to lift them up and help them like be successful if I get those opportunities because I see that as kind of part of my role just in the organization. And I would say the same thing with players like I said earlier, like there's going to be a scout or a bunch of scouts that think they're a big leaguer, and any player you bring in the organization probably have the tools to be a big leaguer. And so, like, how can I help them reach their potential? It might be like getting the right coach that will like be able to speak to them and relate to them, and they can relate to them. But it also might be, it might be sitting down with an analyst and walking through like some of their weaknesses and a coach, like how they can help fix those weaknesses. We started doing something called player development plans in 2008. We were one of the first organizations to do it. And like I would sit down with players and like our hitting coach, and we'd walk through like things they do really well, things they can improve on. Most teams do that now. But those are opportunities to like, you're not trying to hide the information from the player. You're trying to like show them what they're really good at to build them up, but also what they can work on. And then it's really on the player and the coach to like figure out how we get that weakness to be something that they can improve on to like help them make the next step in their career. And so that's what it's about for me. It's like when every player is not going to play in the big leagues. I think 12% play in the big leagues that you originally sign. And there's relationships there, like we're going to sign a high school kid that are in our organization for 6 years and they top out at AA. And so when I say reach the potential, I'm definitely talking about baseball, but I'm also talking about people. Like there's a responsibility for a player development system to raise young men that are going to be like fathers and members of their community, um, and I think it's important for everybody to be like families are giving them to us, or they're like taking that step and like they're going to spend a lot of time with us. So like things I'm very proud of, and there's been really smart people that have helped develop them, is like building kind of life skills outside of baseball. And those skills, I would argue, make them better baseball players too. Because anyone who's played sports, and you can imagine at this level, like some of their self-worth or the way they see themselves goes up and down depending on how well they're playing. But that doesn't mean that they're a bad person if they're hitting 200. And so being able to give them, whether it's leadership skills or coping skills or just like other passions, and helping them develop as whole people outside the game, make them a better baseball player too, and a better member of the communities. And so that is like at its core something I'm very passionate about. And I think the Giants are too, and we've done a good job over the years. And um, that's maybe not seen by everybody. As a fan, you might see the end result of some of these young men, and they're like unbelievable people, many of them. But a lot of them are still growing as well, and they're going to make mistakes, and that's part of it as well. But ideally, you're creating like an environment that help them be better people too and reach their potential.
Mm. Yeah, that's really awesome. And I guess a final thought for me is there's a lot of people, young people who want to work in a baseball front office, and I know that there's actually someone I won't name now, but maybe after someone I know.
Jesse Foppert.
No, no. Chris Dominguez, Tyler. There's someone, there's people that I know that like, to try and get an internship with the major league team. I actually know someone that had talked to you about it, and I know that you've been a part of the interview process in the past, but for anybody that wants to work in a system, like that wants to work in a baseball, operations department, maybe as an intern, and then they could work their way up internally. And I remember being at an event where Larry Bear said that the Giants, and maybe you could confirm this number, I don't know if it's exactly right, but like 70% or something of the Giants promotions, I don't know if this is just in baseball operations, are internal promotions. So once you're in a front office, you could really show your worth to a big league team, and you could work your way up. And that's kind of what you did as well in your career. So what would you say to anybody who's coming out of college and wants to work for a big league team, and thinks that they might have a resume that might match what an organization is looking for, and they apply for that position that 750 other people applied for? What would you tell them, that maybe could separate them from the rest of the candidates?
Love the question. Something I'm definitely passionate about. I've spent some time in recent years. Um, I do a lot of informational interviews. I At a time I was doing like 1 to 5 a week. I would just do it in the morning at 8 o'clock, like with my coffee and have a conversation. We did a number of career events in recent years. We did one for veterans. We did one for women ball players. We did one for individuals that are bilingual, just to kind of add different skill sets to our group, and different kind of vantage points. But in general, like my message to anybody is like you need to have a passion to work in this game. Like just know that it is going to be a lifestyle. And that's real in almost any position with the game. Um, but I would say like you don't have to have permission, which means like being hired by a team to start getting those skills that you'll use with a team. So, if you're still in college, like reach out to the baseball or softball team and like see how you can help. If you're out of college, there's many like sports facilities, drive line and push and like tread athletics are like three of the big ones. But you don't have to just apply to like baseball positions here. There's independent ball teams, so you can like start building that resume. And then a lot of the hiring season in baseball happens like from October to December, and you're going to see a lot of positions posted. So I would look through those positions, even if you're not ready to apply, and just look at those job descriptions and see the skills that they're asking for, they're looking for. So like if you want to be an analyst, like look at what teams are looking for and then just start learning those skills. If you're out of school, you can take Coursera classes or like or Demi or something like that. If you want to be a scout, you can literally start going to games and just writing reports. And you don't have to have permission to do that. I've got a friend of mine who works for the Giants now named Sam Gainey, who went to Berkeley High 10 years after I did. And his story is like he went to Cal. He always wanted to work in baseball. Every weekend he'd go to Cal League games and he would just write reports and start posting them online. He met the scouts. He ended up getting hired by the A's eventually. And, he became the international scouting director for them, went to the Padres and ran their player development system, is with the Giants now. So like he just made that happen in a way. And so like if you like baseball analytics, like ask a question and then try to solve it. And then when you send your resume in, you can send an example of something that you've done. So it might help you stand out that way. So I would just say go get it. I think it's worth it. It's competitive. There's no doubt about it. But also it just takes getting that opportunity. And I would say when you get that opportunity, like run with it. Be the first one there, last one to leave. Ask questions. If you don't know something, there's nothing wrong with that. Try to learn something every day. Like all those things are important once you get your foot in the door. But just start doing it now.
That's awesome. Yeah, and so just to kind of bring it to a close, thank you again so much for your time. What's next for you? What are you looking for? Are you you kind of touched on earlier, are you trying to maybe stay in baseball, find something new? What's the next dream gig?
Yeah. So I've obviously put a lot of thought in this recently. I'm having some conversations with teams. I don't know if I'll find the right role immediately or over time. And some of that's just so that I can learn and grow in a different organization. Um, Another space I'm pretty fascinated by is actually college athletics. Um, it's becoming, many of the listeners may or may not know, but it's becoming very professionalized with NIL money. It's a little bit of a moving target with some lawsuits that are still out there, but a lot of college athletes are kind of on one-year deals and they enter a portal and they can stay or go. And I think my skill set may fit well in there because I've been doing it at in a different space, but I find that fascinating. I would still have a win and loss every day, and maybe I can like raise the floor of like what an athletics department's doing in some capacity. So that's just an idea out there. And there's a few like non-sports things I've thought about. There's like a nonprofit I've thought about starting. So I love playing poker. I've been playing more poker. So I don't know that I would ever do it professionally, but it's something I haven't like had a chance to do over an extended period of time. But we'll see. Yeah, I'm taking my time, but I'm also like with spring training coming, you asked that question before, and even that question, like sparked a little bit. Like I can feel it in my bones that like I kind of need to be doing something related to baseball. My son plays, so I get some outlet there. But yeah, I'm gonna feel it if I'm not like physically with a team at that point, which probably healthy for me to like feel it even if I'm not
to,
with a team.
to get the itch.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
Exactly.
well, shoot, we're glad that we didn't do this like a month later because then you would have probably hated us. But you could get to work on some of the books back there.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, no, definitely we definitely appreciate the time and we kept you for a lot longer than I said and you know, you've been very very awesome in this and we'll be sure to make a copy of this and send it out to every single team. So you can attach it to your resume. No, you probably don't need us. You definitely don't need us. Um but yeah, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Appreciate it, Stephen. Tyler, I haven't met you before, so I appreciate meeting you and like really enjoyed the conversation. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, when I get a random name in my head, I'm just gonna like shoot. I'll do it. I'll put it in the subject line. So and then you'll know.
Well, yeah, I can name a bunch of them because they're on my desk.
Yeah,
So this desk here that has, every player that got there, like Kevin Franson's a known name, but I'm
that's a
looking at
fun
it
one.
right now. Gino Espinelli, I don't know if you know his name. John Bowker.
Yep.
John
Um,
Bowker, Rio Americano up here in Sacramento.
got Dan Ortmeyer,
Used
Wallace
Ortmeyer on the
Joaquin,
grid. Yeah.
Joe
Waldis Joaquin.
Patterson, Nick Noonan, Joe Martinez, Francisco Piguero. Yeah,
Brian
there's a lot
Bocock.
of
Do you have
them.
a Brian Bocock
I
on
have him.
there?
He's right next to Emmanuel Burris. They were signed together, and they were like, were fast tracked. And it goes back to Noah Lowry, who's I know he's around locally. Yeah, Billy Sadler, Henry Sosa is still playing in Korea, I think.
Yeah, Henry Sosa. Was
Yeah,
he was for Jeff Kempinger. I remember he pitched in the Futures game, Henry Sosa.
good memory. Yeah,
Yeah, he's an interesting one. Yeah, no, there's a lot of names, and I'm sure listeners are screaming, telling their player that they want to throw out there. So it's a lot of fun. That's why
a
Immaculate
lot of
Grid is
fun.
so fun. Um,
Exactly.
anyways, Yeshayah, we appreciate the time. Everybody could go ahead and follow the podcast on social media at shutdown underscore inning, and then of course RizzoCast too. Go check that out as well. And then everybody could go like and subscribe, do all that fun stuff. More stuff coming up soon, and we will see you next time.